Start by filling your casting bucket 3/4 full with water. Then practice the handhold position that you'd like to cast. Lower your hands all the way into the bucket until you hit the bottom, and then pull back up about 1 centimeter, ensuring that no part or any of your hands or arms are in contact with the bucket. Now, practice staying still in that position for 1 minute. When you're confident about your hand position, and you know you're standing in a good position, go ahead and dispose of that water, and let's move on to the next step. So to start with, we need to measure out the right amount of water to be mixed with your alginate powder. If you're using a regular size kit, you need to measure out 2,280 ml of water, and for large kits, you'll need to measure out 5,400 ml of water. The water should be less than 21 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. If you don't have a thermometer, please err on the side of caution by using water that physically feels cold to the touch. Once you've measured out the correct amount of water, you can add it to the casting bucket. Now, before we touch the alginate, there are a couple of things you need to do. The first is optional, and that's to either apply petroleum jelly or baby oil to your hands. Now it's time to get your stopwatch out because the next step is a timed activity. But before you start the timer, let's take a quick look at what you need to achieve in this 2-minute window. Here's a quick summary. You're going to start the stopwatch, pour all of the alginate powder into the water, mix it with your electronic mixer, smother your hands in pink goo, then resume your handhold position and dunk your hands. That's what you need to achieve within your 2-minute window. Okay, so if you have a regular kit, you'll be tipping about 570 grams of alginate into the water. And if you have a large kit, you'll be using 1,350 grams. That's all of the alginate that's included in your kit. Alright, let's go ahead and do it. I'll start the timer and pour the alginate into the water, mixing it as I go. At about 1 minute 30 seconds, I take the mixer out, we dunk our hands into the pink mixture, pull them back out again, use our other hands to rub the mixture into the back and front of the hand, in around the rings and underneath the fingernails. That'll help to remove some of the micro air bubbles that form on the surface of your skin, and it'll also help us get a more detailed casting result. Once you've done that, you're going to resume the handhold position and dunk your hands just like you did in the practice round with water. Lower your hands right down until you hit the bottom of the bucket, then raise them up slightly so that no part of your hands or arms are in contact with the bucket. And that's it, you've completed all of the timed activities within the 2-minute window. Now all you have to do is stay as still as possible for the next 5 to 6 minutes while the mixture solidifies into a rubbery mould. Be sure that your hands don't start to float by watching the line on your wrists. Try and keep them at the same depth in the alginate at all times. Alright, now we're going to remove our hands from the mould, starting with the smallest person first. So what you need to do is very gently gyrate your wrist and wiggle your fingers down below until the air seal is broken. Now if you're wearing any rings, do make sure that they come unstuck from the alginate before you begin to pull your arm out nice and slowly. If you are wearing a ring, it's a good idea to dip that finger downwards like this as you pull your hand out of the mould. Do also be careful not to scratch the mould with any long fingernails. Take it in turns, one at a time, until all hands are removed from the rubbery mould. Excellent, you've now got a highly detailed mould and you're almost ready to start the stone casting process. But before you do, let's clean this mould up to ensure that we get the best results possible. The first thing I recommend doing is removing these flappy bits of alginate from the top of the mould. Once you've gotten rid of the big bits of alginate here, I recommend swilling some cold water around inside of the mould to help remove any loose fragments of alginate that might have fallen into the mould. Do this a few times to make sure that you've removed all of the debris from inside of the mould. And on the final time, make sure that you get as much of the water out of the mould as possible, because we don't want any mini pools of water to affect your casting results. If you'd like to, you can allow the mould to dry for a few minutes, but please move on to the next step within 30 minutes, as the alginate material may begin to shrink if it's allowed to dry for too long. Making the casting. Now that we have our mould prepared, cleaned and dried, it's time to make the liquid stone to pour into the mould. First things first, let's pop on those protective gloves because the liquid stone heats up as it dries. Once you've got your gloves on, we're going to measure the water you need for mixing the stone powder. If you have a regular kit, you need to measure out 750 ml of water, and if you have a large kit, you'll need 1175 ml of water. Pour your water into your plastic mixing bowl and get your timer out again, because you have 5 minutes to perform the next couple of actions, which is plenty of time to do this at a nice relaxed pace. So once you've started your timer, you're going to pour all of the stone powder into the water, and then you're going to let that powder soak for roughly 60 seconds. After that 60 seconds is up, you need to stir the powder into the water using your gloved hands. Keep stirring until all of the lumps in the powder are gone, which should only take a couple of minutes more. And after that 2 minutes is up, the liquid stone should have turned into a smooth paste with a thin, paint-like consistency. Now we're going to start pouring the liquid stone into the mould, but we're going to do that using a very specific method. So grab your moulding bucket and tip it sideways at about a 45-degree angle. The angle doesn't have to be precise, but in many ways, the steeper you can make the angle, the better. Now, while it's tipped in this position, you want to slowly pour the stone mixture into the mould, whilst also rotating the bucket in a circular motion, like this. You're going to do that until the cavity is about 25% full. Now, once it's about 25% full, grab the bucket by the sides and bang it lightly on the work surface. Then give it a few taps all the way around the edge of the bucket to help remove those really small air bubbles. And you're going to repeat the last couple of steps over and over until the mould is full. So tilt the bucket, fill the mould whilst rotating the bucket, then give it a few light taps on the work surface and on the side of the bucket with your hand. Now, when you're coming up to the last round of filling, you need to make sure that you don't overfill the mould. So I typically fill up the mould to the top of the cavity and no further. Okay, now that the mould is full up, I recommend tapping the side of the bucket for the next 5 to 10 minutes, and doing that will help you get an even better final result because it will help to dislodge some of those smaller air bubbles from the stone mixture. After 5 to 10 minutes of tapping, we're going to leave the stone casting alone for the next 2 or 3 hours. But do be sure not to wait any longer than 4 hours because we want to remove the stone from that dark, damp environment and allow the casting to breathe while it dries. Just as a side note, you might have excess plaster at this point. If that is the case, please don't pour it down your kitchen sink because you don't want to risk clogging up your pipework. Just let it solidify in the plastic container and it will soon turn into a solid block that's easy to remove and to dispose of. The same goes for washing your items down. Please use an outside tap or do it in a wash bucket so that you can dispose of the dirty water elsewhere rather than down your pipes. If you give your protective gloves a quick rinse now, it means that you can use them for a later step. Okay, it's been about 3 hours since we poured the stone mixture into the mould, and now it's time for the big reveal. Exciting times. So grab your bucket, carefully turn it upside down, gently press against the sides of the bucket until the suction breaks and the mould should come out of the bucket. Once you've managed to remove the mould from the bucket, mine happened to come out first time, you can start gently removing the alginate in small chunks with your fingers like this. Be sure to remove only small chunks at a time because you don't want to end up breaking a finger off or taking out any of the finer details like the gemstone on an engagement ring. You can pop the alginate straight into the trash since it isn't reusable. Now you'll notice that I haven't removed all of the alginate just yet, and to do that I use the wooden tool included inside of your kit. Before I do that, I'm going to wash my hands with soap to make sure that I've got really clean fingers. In fact, if you've still got your protective gloves from earlier on in the process, you can give them a quick clean and pop those back on if you'd like. So you'll notice that the wooden tool that is provided in your kit has 2 ends, a pointed end and a chamfered end. And I'm going to use the pointed end to dig out the small remaining bits of alginate. So here we go, there's no real technique to this, just get in there and dig those little bits out. Now, if there's any bits that you can't get out right now, you can leave them in there for the time being, and over time they will shrivel up, shrink, and they should be easier to remove at a later date. And now we're going to do a quick cleanup job to remove any minor imperfections. So depending on how your cast came out, you might see tiny little bobbles on the surface of your casting. So to remove those mini air bubbles, I'm going to use the chamfered end of the wooden tool and simply smooth over that area of the stone until it's no longer visible. Okay, so nice and simple, just like that. Once we're done with the cleanup job, it's time to set your casting out in a warm, bright environment to dry. I recommend propping the base up on something to allow the air to move all the way around and underneath the casting, and that way the casting can dry out the stone at an even rate. We're going to leave this to dry for at least 1 week, maybe even 2 weeks, before we make the finishing touches. Here's a different casting I made earlier. Included in the kit was some sandpaper, and I'm going to use this to tidy up the base of the casting. So I'm in a well-ventilated area, and I'm going to take my sandpaper and lightly bevel the bottom corner of the stone casting. Be really careful as you do this because any thin flakes of plaster will be very brittle, and if they break off, they can actually take a larger chunk of stone than you might expect. Now I'm going to lay the base flat onto the sandpaper and gently move the casting back and forth in a slight circular motion, allowing the weight of the casting to do all the work for me. Once you've done that for a while, the base becomes nice and smooth. I'm really happy with how that base looks now, so it's time to move on to the final step of sealing the casting. Before we mix the glue, go ahead and blow off any dust and debris around the casting. You can also use the included paintbrush to sweep off any powdery dust. Now grab a small dish and mix 1 part craft glue to approximately 4 parts water. Measurements don't have to be too specific for this, but what you're looking for is something like this consistency here. So we're going to go ahead and paint this mixture onto the casting, being sure to get into all of the small nooks and crannies, and once the casting is dry it will have a nice smooth texture to it, it will look just as beautiful as before, and it will be more protected from the elements. Alright, I'm going to let that dry and I'll come back to it in a few hours time. Excellent, that glue is now fully dry and I can pick up the casting with my bare hands without worrying that I'm going to make it dirty. Well guys, that's almost it. I just want to take a quick minute to personally thank you for purchasing the London Casting Company hand casting kit, and I really hope you love your casting results. And if I could just ask one favour from you, it would just be to leave me a product review from wherever you bought this kit. Guys, I hope you really enjoyed this process. Thank you so much for buying our kit, and thank you so much for watching.